Hey folks, Joe here. Just a quick reminder to please check out my album, Nite Creatures, now available via Decca Records on all streaming platforms and on vinyl in independent record stores and online. This is Joe Wong. Welcome to the Trap Set. This week's guest is Chris Frantz. Best known as drummer for Talking Heads and Tom Tom Club, Chris released his memoir, Remain in Love, earlier this year. Chris spoke to me in July from his home in Connecticut.
Where are you calling from, Joe?
I'm calling from Pasadena, California.
Oh.
And you're in Connecticut, right?
I am. I'm in the town of Fairfield, Connecticut.
And in fact, the person that first put us in touch was Money Mark, and he was over here one day at my house. We were going out for lunch, and I think he was talking on the phone with you, and I said, oh, we should get him on the podcast.
I remember that now. Yeah.
He's a great guy and a great friend.
We love that guy. Yeah. And a super talented artist.
Well, Chris, what was the first thought that went through your mind this morning?
First thought that went through my mind this morning was, I got to let the dogs out. I don't want them to pee on the carpet.
How many dogs do you have?
Just two beagles.
How often do you take them out?
Oh, quite a bit. I mean, they're beagles, and they like to go out a lot, unless it's raining, which it is now, and in which case they don't want to go out at all. They just curl up and go to sleep.
Have you been noticing if COVID quarantine is affecting your relationship to creativity or your creative output?
I've been working on this book the whole time, like various aspects. I mean, I finished writing the book some time ago, but then there was editing, and then now there's promotion, and so I have a lot to do. I haven't taken on any new projects. I'm wondering what to do after this, after I've finished this phase, and I think I'll write another book, actually.
Oh, really? What will the subject of the next book be?
Well, I thought it might be a travel book because I love to travel. I've done a lot of it in my life, and I think people like to read about other people's travels.
Yeah, that's a great idea. So it wouldn't be about your past travels necessarily. It would be an excuse to get out into the world and chronicle your journeys.
I think it would be a little of both. Yeah, little of both. And I mean, I could write many words about our various visits to Japan, for example, and the people we met there. And but there's some authors that just write about travel, like the great Bruce Chatwin, for example. I don't know if you've ever read anything.
And there was someone named Mail.
There's quite a few, but I thought I might do something like that. And Tina and I also had. Tina's going to be working on a book too. It's early days yet, but she's got her story to tell, which is very interesting. And but after that, or maybe in between, we'd like to do something we haven't done before, which is just strictly electronic music. Something that the two of us could do just the two of us could do together. we have all the gear already, all the drum machines and synthesizers and everything that we need. And we thought we might just sit down and do something, inspired by Kraftwerk. But, we would call it Chris und Tina.
I like it. Well,
Yeah.
you alluded to your book earlier, Remain in Love, which is coming out in a couple weeks. What was the impetus to write the book?
People kept telling me, Chris, you should write a book. And Chris, when are you going to write that book? So finally, I just decided to buckle down and do it. And the reason I thought it was a good idea was that much has been written, particularly in magazines and things about talking heads over the years. But in many cases, it was not very accurate or even true of what was really going on. And so I thought, well, none of the other members of the band have written a book yet about their lives, so I'm going to do mine. And, it's not just about Talking Heads or just about Tom Tom Club or anything like that. It's about my own, family history and my, people we've met in our travels and people that we've worked with. And I think it's a pretty good story. And because of my relationship with Tina, I think it's even more unique because that Tina is the character in the book that's there from the beginning until the end.
What was your process of writing the book?
I went to an agent, my manager, actually the same guy that introduced me to Money Mark, said. His name is Tomas Cookman, and he's out in Los Angeles. He has a record company called Nacional. So anyway, we met Tomas when he was managing Los Fabulosos Cadillacs, and he asked us to produce that band. And we saw how he operated, and we really liked the way he operated and did things. And so anyway, I asked Tomas to find me a literary agent, and he did. A really, really good one, top notch. And that agent said to me, "Well, Chris, we don't really take on too many rock stars, but we think you have a good story to tell. So here's what you have to do: you have to write an outline, and then you have to write a précis, a synopsis of the book, and then you have to write 3 chapters, and they have to be really good." So I did that, and like a week later, I had all these offers for a book deal. I was amazed how fast it went, and ended up going with this company called St. Martin's Press, and so I'd written 3 chapters, but then I had to write all the rest. It seemed like it was going to be a lot of work. And I got a little bit of anxiety, more than usual. I'm not usually a very anxious person, but I got when I was confronted with like looking at my outline and all the stuff I was going to have to write and have it be good, I got kind of anxious. But I was rescued by a little bottle of CBD oil. I took a dropper, half a dropper full of this CBD oil from Vermont, organic stuff from Vermont, and it worked a charm, and it calmed me right down. And then I was able to. I wrote a lot of the book here in Connecticut, and then I also wrote a good deal of it over in France, where Tina's mother had her family home, and Tina still maintains that family home in Brittany, which is the northwest corner of France. And then I wrote all the Compass Point chapters down at Compass Point. the little apartment that we still have there in the Bahamas. And so I wrote it in 3 places. And I didn't work every single day. Sometimes I would take it like 3 weeks off, like during the Christmas holidays, or I didn't do too much writing on my birthday, for example. My process was just to write about my fondest memories, and also some of the memories that were kind of challenging, you know, in one way or another. And finally, after about a year and a half, I felt like I had enough material. And then came the editing part, which Tina was very helpful with.
It seems like you have a pretty detailed memory of your childhood based on the book. Did you jar any memories loose, or, kind of gain any new insights into your life trajectory by writing the book?
I think I gained more insight about other people than I did about myself. I feel like I knew myself at this point in my life pretty well, but I found that I had maybe a deeper understanding now of for example, David Byrne was going through during the that exciting period with Talking Heads, and also what Tina may have been going through. I think I had just a better understanding of the demands and the pressures that were on them to be fabulous and to come up with great parts and things like that.
Yeah. So how did your attitude towards them shift during the course of writing the book?
Well, I think I just had more empathy, and I mean, I've always been a person who has who likes other people and who usually gets along well with other people. But I found that I had more of a feeling of admiration for both of them, and Jerry too. Jerry was a wonderful part of Talking Heads, and brilliant move to bring him into the band, if I do say so myself.
Did your background in visual arts or music help inform the writing of the book?
One thing that was instilled into us at art school was that it's okay to, greatly admire, say, Matisse, or greatly admire Andy Warhol, or Frank Stella, the great artists. But it's very important that you never fail to put something that's unique unto yourself into your artwork. Even though you might be inspired by Warhol, you can't just copy Warhol. You have to do something that is unique unto yourself that nobody else has done before. So that was instilled into us in art school, and I think it carried through into our music, and also into my writing. I realized I have to write with my own voice. I can't, be pretentious or put on airs. I've got to just be myself.
Have there been any autobiographies in music in particular, or in general, of anybody that you've really enjoyed?
Yes. One of my favorite. I've read a lot of rock and roll memoirs and biographies, and one of my favorites is "Diary of a Rock and Roll Star" by Ian Hunter. And have you ever read
I
that?
haven't read that one. I have read a lot of them, but I have not read that one.
Well, I think he just did Ian he's a neighbor of ours here, and I think he's 80 now, but he recently just put in an epilogue, or a couple more chapters, and he wrote very simply and unpretentiously about his time with Mott the Hoople, particularly the tour of the United States that they did when All the Young Dudes was a hit. and they were in the in the company of David Bowie and Mick Ronson, and it was a very heady time, the glam rock days. So that was entertaining to me. I enjoyed Debbie Harry's book, and
Hmm.
I'm enjoying Kathy Valentine's book, which just came out, and I loved Keith Richards'
Oh,
book.
that's a good one.
That, of course, was written by a very professional writer, but you could tell he captured Keith's voice, I think, pretty well. I think what they did, I was told what they did was they just sat on the beach down in the Turks and Caicos Islands, and Keith told him stories, and he recorded them, and then he put it all together.
So you mentioned that it was a bit overwhelming at first to write this book and to make sure that the results were good. So what to you did it mean to write a good book? What was quality?
I wanted to convey real feelings and real emotions that I was not interested in writing a tell all kind of book. Um, my experience with Talking Heads was most 99% of the time really good, and I wanted to convey that it was a great experience. And I also with Tom Tom Club, the things that we did outside of music, like sailing and traveling. I wanted to convey that to my audience. I feel like I've had an idyllic life in many ways, and I hope I captured that somehow.
I think you did.
Good. And I must tell you that how I really judged whether the book was all right or not was after Tina read it and she told me she liked it. I was like, "Whew, thank God."
It seems like Tina is probably the first person that reads anything that you write, but were there other people in your circle that you were sharing it with?
My manager, Tomas Cookman, because I know that he likes to read music books, and he's become a good friend besides being just my manager. He's more than that to us now. So I would send things to him, and for basically for his approval, to make sure that, because the last thing I wanted to do was write a mean, nasty book where I sounded bitter and like you know what I mean, embittered. Uh, I didn't want to. I didn't want to give people that impression at all, because I'm not. I'm not like that. I consider myself a very fortunate guy.
In your book, you talk about early on in maybe grade school trying to play the trumpet and kind of failing into drums, and moving to the snare drum, and that's when music. It felt. It seems like that's when you felt as though you could participate in music rather than just consume it as a listener.
Uh huh. Yeah.
Can you remember the feeling that you had when you connected to the snare drum?
I was in the fourth grade, and I was going to a public elementary school, and we had a really good band teacher. As I say in the book, he said, I told him I had been playing trumpet, and I told him, "Look, I'm practicing, but it's just not happening for me." And he said, "Yeah, I can see it's not really working for you, but you have a really good sense of rhythm. What do you say we switch you to the drums?" So he gave me, a couple of lessons, and he gave me the little rubber drum pad and the sticks and the elementary rudiments book to practice from, and and so I went home and I started playing on that, and doing my various rudiments and learning that. And one day, my father, who was in the military, came home and he had two. I still have them. Two Ludwig field marching snares, and a bass drum. Now I don't know what ever happened to the marching bass drum. That was really cool. I wish I had that. But I've got the two snare drums, and I would stand there with the snare drum and held up by a strap around my shoulder, as one does, and I just, I, I connected somehow. I felt like empowered, with this drum on hanging off my shoulder. uh, I wasn't able to do it this year, but I still lead a little parade of children for our local library that they have on the 4th of July. I usually play like a Bo Diddley beat. They seem to like that. but then I remember telling my dad, like, these marching drums are really great, but what about a little drum kit? Could I have a drum kit? And he said, well, if you practice hard and you show that you're serious, we'll see. And then the following Christmas, I came downstairs and there was a Slingerland drum kit for me. That was right about the time that the Beatles came out. One thing led to another, and I was now playing. My little drum kit didn't even have a hi-hat. Anyway, I got it together and I started playing with some other friends from the elementary school band, and we had a little band. We formed a little band called the Lost Chords,
Good
which
name.
I think it's a really good name, and I'm still friends with some of those guys. And uh, this was in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, it's interesting. In your voice, I can detect a tiny bit of Pittsburgh and then also some Kentucky, maybe because you were born in Kentucky, right? And your mother's family lived there, and you in the book you talk about driving there and having a girlfriend there in high school.
Yes, and I love to go to Kentucky because Pittsburgh was fine. I had a good life there, but when I went down to Kentucky, it was like a whole different world. And my grandparents were very, they were not as strict with me, let's say, as my own parents were. So they would give me the car and say, "You go out and have a good time, Chris," and I did.
In your book, you talk about your parents' apprehension to send you to RISD, which is where you ultimately ended up attending college.
Yeah.
Was there any pressure to become a military man yourself?
My father never put any pressure on me or my brother to be in the military. And in fact, I think my own father was opposed to the Vietnam War. I don't think he thought it was a good idea.
You don't say that emphatically. Did you not really talk about it much with your dad at the time?
I, I, I don't think we did discuss the actual war very much. We discussed politics. My dad was also a lawyer. He
Right.
was a
He was part of the JAG program and got sent by the government to Harvard Law School. Correct.
That is correct. Yes, and he excelled at that, and then he became an army lawyer for a while, and then he retired from active duty and remained in the Army Reserve, but he also had a private practice in law on the. He was a kind of type A, and he worked really hard. I mean, I don't know how he did it. He would come home from a full day's work at the law office and change into his army uniform and go out to do some more work with the army. So that same night.
Do you feel like you have a similar work ethic?
I think I do have a good work ethic. I don't know that I'm quite as driven as my father was. Although, I mean, maybe I am.
Well,
Maybe
you
I.
could you categorized him as type A. Would you categorize yourself as type A as well?
No, I don't think so. I'm a different type.
What you gonna do when you get out of jail? I'm gonna have some fun. What do you consider fun? Fun, natural fun.
So you went to RISD, and you mentioned earlier that one of the most important lessons that you drew from that education was to find your own artistic voice. And that's interesting to me because I went to a music school, and I've noticed over the years of, just being a music fan and recording these interviews that folks that went to art school tend to find that artistic voice in music more readily than folks that go to music school, which is more, in my experience, was like a vocational school where you were to learn how to do what everybody else is doing before you're allowed to have your own voice.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I've seen that. I've noticed that as well with people we knew that went to, say, Berkeley. Is that where you went?
Could you tell by the tone in my voice?
No, no. But that's where you went?
Yeah, I went for a couple years and then dropped out, like all of the good Berkeley students do.
Yeah, that's what I was told. We worked with a singer named Charles Pettigrew, who'd gone to, I think, 1 year or maybe 2 years at Berkeley. And I said, "Oh, you didn't finish?" He said, "None of the good people finish, Chris."
Well, before I went to Berkeley, I was touring in bands in high school. And when we played in Providence, we stayed at a loft that was run by a bunch of RISD students and alumni. I mean, I think from the time that you were at RISD and the way that you describe it to the 90s and beyond, there is, a continuity of spirit. It did feel very exciting and very experimental and adventurous. And the people that I associate it with in the music world are some of the most kind of adventurous musicians that I'm aware of. Can you talk a little bit about, aside from the technical skills that you learned at school, what some of the more kind of lasting spiritual lessons that you learned were?
Gosh, lasting spirit. That's a big question. One thing they tell you at RISD is that there's no guarantees. You might do really well at the Rhode Island School of Design, and you might, get. Well, we didn't even have grades then. We had like pass fail, but you might get great critiques from your teachers and all that. But once you get out into the real world, nobody's going to know who you are, and you're going to have to struggle just like everybody else.
How did you handle that lesson? Like, did that cause any kind of panic in you, or were you excited to get out into the world and struggle with everybody else?
Well, I was very excited to get out into the world, and particularly to go to New York. We had visited New York a couple or three times, and it was so exciting, and so many artists there, and good artists, not just like people that paint on Sundays. No, it was like serious, and I think I described the first time. The first time I went to Soho, it was with Tina and a bunch of other kids that we had a club called the Painting Club, and we went to see Andy Warhol's exhibit at the Whitney. He had a show up with a cow wallpaper and the silver inflatable pillows, and Mylar pillows, and it was really cool and everything. But then after we saw that show, we went downtown and we went to a concert that was really just for us, performed by John Cage at the Kitchen. I mean, John Cage. And afterwards, he served us, he gave a little talk and he served us wild mushrooms that he had picked himself that morning somewhere north of New York City, and a little thimbleful glass of wine that he said was his favorite kind of wine. I mean, that was pretty spiritual right there, I think. And then we went around the corner up the street to the Spring Street Bar on Spring Street, the corner of West Broadway and Spring Street. There were not very many bars or restaurants in Soho. I think there were maybe three bars, and in a 10-block area.
Right. This is at a time when New York City was relatively depressed, and artists could get into Soho and have these giant lofts in which to work.
Yes. But there was still a lot of light manufacturing going on, so the streets were full of trucks that were either dropping stuff off or picking stuff up, and it was a rigorous kind of place. But we went to the Spring Street Bar, and we had just enough money for a couple of beers, so we were all standing at the bar, and I looked down. Well, first of all, somebody had put a whole roll of quarters into the jukebox they had there and played the same song over and over again, which was Autobahn by Kraftwerk. And it was the first time I had ever heard that song. And I thought, oh my God, this is really modern and cool. And
someday I'm going to start an electronic band.
yeah, right. And then I looked down the bar, and I saw at the end of the bar, I saw Jasper Johns, the great painter, talking to the amazing gallerist Leo Castelli, and I just felt like, okay,
These people are really here.
Yeah, they're really here, and the art world is a big world, but in New York, it's not that big that you can't bump into all these great people just in everyday life. So Tina and I knew that at that point that we were going to be moving to New York when we graduated, and we loved Providence, and I still love Providence when I go up there, but. At that particular point in my life, I had explored Benefit Street from one end to the other, and it was time for a new adventure.
You and Tina met at RISD, and actually that's where you met David Byrne too.
Yes.
How would you describe the dynamic of your relationship with those two in the beginning?
Well, David became a good friend. We had a band together called the Artistics, which was a cover band, although we did write some original songs during that time, such as Psycho Killer and Warning Sign. And Tina was a girl at the time, a young woman that I had met and I fell in love with, and eventually we became romantically linked. Took a little while because she had a boyfriend already when I met her, and I had a girlfriend, and so we became friends first, and then we eventually became romantically involved. But when Tina and I had a painting studio together that we shared, provided by the school, and one day David came to our studio, and he said, I've got this idea for a song. I wonder if you could help me, finish it. And that song was Psycho Killer. And Tina wrote the bridge in French because David had already gone to a Japanese girl at the school and asked her would she write the bridge in Japanese. And he said, she said, no way. she she didn't want anything to do with a song about a psycho killer. But Tina got that it was kind of in the spirit of Alice Cooper and not completely serious. And she helped, and I helped with a couple of verses. I wrote a couple of verses, and I thought to myself, "Oh my God, we've just written this great song." So it's like a mashup of Velvet Underground and Otis Redding. You know,
Yeah.
my relationship with both of them was excellent.
When you left school and had decided to move to New York, what were your ambitions?
My ambition was either to become a world famous musician and have a world famous band, or to become one of the greatest painters of all time. That was my ambition, and I felt like I can be a young painter at age 45. We should do the rock and roll thing now while we're young, because in those days you didn't have too many 45-year-old rock musicians. Now they're all over the place.
Right. So, how did you manifest that ambition? Once you had the band going, like, how did you work? Were you rehearsing a lot? Were you writing a lot? Like, what was your method of operation?
Well, it's we all had day jobs. We had to get day jobs to pay the rent. I mean, our rent was only just over $300 a month. So between Tina and I shared the loft with David, so it was like we each had to raise $100 a month, and we had these day jobs on 57th Street. All three of us worked. Now, if you know New York, you know that 57th Street is the big shopping street where all the fancy stores are, and it's you know it's very posh. So we were living downtown. We'd take the subway uptown to our day jobs, and then at the end of the day, we'd come back downtown. At first, Tina, declined to join the band. She thought it was a bad idea. She said, it's a boys' club. Rock and roll's a boys' club. I'm not going to get into that. But
She was right.
Yeah, she said, I'll support you in your efforts. And give you encouragement. And so it was just David and I, and we thought, we would after work we would play together, and if it's just guitar and drums, it's not exactly what you call a full sound or anything, but we started finding our direction, finding our musical voices, and I thought that we would find another guitarist or keyboard player or another bass player. No problem. I thought, we'll find them. No, it'll be no problem. Well, it was a problem because we had this particular aesthetic. I think that most other people were still copying the Rolling Stones or the Who or something like that, and we weren't interested in that. But then one day, thank God, Tina came in the door with a bass guitar, a Fender Precision that she had been buying on layaway, evidently for months. She'd been putting $5 down every week on this guitar. And I was like, hallelujah. So then we had a three-piece, and Tina had never played bass before, but she had played like folk guitar, acoustic guitar. and she knew chords, and she could read music, which neither David nor I could really do. And she taught herself. Like sometimes I've read, oh, David taught Tina how to play bass, but no, she taught herself. And I mean, yes, Tina, David and I would make suggestions from time to time, but we didn't teach her. She taught herself. And she had a very interesting. She didn't have that rock and roll vocabulary that so many of us playing in bands had. You know, Chuck Berry and Bo Diddley and all that. Um, she was coming from I think, a more classical point of view, and so it made for. She created really interesting parts uh, that were surprising and worked very well with what we were trying to do. So it was a wonderful time.
How did you feel about yourself as a drummer at the time?
Oh, I felt I had a lot of room for improvement. Although Tina always says I was the most evolved musician of the group, but I don't know. I mean, she says that, but I don't know. Maybe she's just trying to make me feel good.
What do you think she means by that?
She said this to me: Chris, when you sit down and play the drums, it sounds like music. So I think that's what she meant.
Did you put any conscious thought into your drumming style, or did it just kind of evolve organically?
It did evolve organically, although I must say that after seeing Tommy Ramone with the Ramones, and the utter simplicity, but the very powerful simplicity that he played with, that had an effect on me. And I thought, well, it's like minimalist art, you know, very few fills, but and when there are, the fills are also minimalist. So there's nothing fancy or flashy about it, and I came to really appreciate that.
You're not hiding behind virtuosity. You know, you're if you're stripping away all of that, all of the kind of ornamentation and fancy fills, then you really have to lock in, which you do.
Yes, yes, that's a excellent way of putting it. Yeah. You should write a book.
And then tell me how you met Jerry.
We were thinking we were doing very well as a trio, but in fact we were being offered a record deal by Seymour Stein of Sire Records, and also a guy out in Berkeley who had a label called Berserkly Records, and Jonathan Richman was on Berserkly, and let's
And
see.
Jerry was in the Modern Lovers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, we were being offered a record deal, but we felt like our sound isn't fully developed enough yet to make a record. So we told Seymour Stein, for example, of Sire Records, Seymour, we loved, we met with him. He saw us play. He loved us. He offered us a deal on the spot. And we, we said, Seymour, we really appreciate that, but we're not ready to make a record yet. We'll call you when we're ready. And we realized that we'd made a couple little demos and things, and we realized that we could rock the party at CBGB's really well, but when we recorded it, it didn't sound that. It wasn't the type of thing that you'd want to listen to over and over again, which a good record you do want to listen to over and over again. So we thought what we need is somebody who plays keyboards, or maybe keyboards and guitar, to help us fill out the sound and have a richer sound, a more dynamic sound. Because when you're a trio, if one person stops playing, it's like a breakdown. So I was home in Pittsburgh, and one of my mother's friends came over to the house, and she said, "Oh, Chris, my nephew plays in a band up in Boston." And I said, "Oh, really? What's the name of his band?" And she said, "The Modern Lovers." Now, I knew that the Modern Lovers had already broken up, but evidently she didn't know that yet. But I said, "Well, what's your nephew's name?" She said, "Ernie Brooks." I said, "Oh, the bass player." She said, "Yeah." And she gave me his number. And just a few days later, when I was back in New York, Tina and David and I went to a restaurant called The Local, which was owned by the guy that had previously owned and founded Max's Kansas City. It was a place where cool people went to kind of like the Max's crowd would go there for their specialty was hamburgers and red wine. And one of the guy making the hamburgers was Julian Schnabel, the painter who
Yes.
became very famous, and he was the burger chef.
Was he a good burger chef?
He was. That guy can cook. So anyway, we were having our burger and our glass of red wine, and I looked across the room and I said, "God damn, there's Ernie Brooks." I recognized him by his big, almost afro of, curly reddish hair. And so I said, "Oh, damn, there's Ernie." So I walked over to his table and I introduced myself and I said, "Ernie, I was just the other day, I was speaking to your aunt who told me that I should get in touch with you." And he said, "Oh, yeah, Aunt Liz." We had a friendly conversation. He said, "Well, what are you guys up to?" And I said, "Well, we're you know, doing some gigs around town, and we're thinking of adding another member of the band." And he said, "Well, what instrument are you looking for?" And I said, "We're looking for a keyboard player who can maybe also play guitar." And he said, "Have you thought of Jerry Harrison?" And I said, "Oh, I would love to get in touch with Jerry Harrison." And he said, "Well, here's his number." He gave me his number. I called Jerry, and Jerry said, "Well, I'm intrigued, but guess what? I just enrolled in a master's program at architecture school at Harvard." I was like, "Oh no." He said, "So I can't just drop out. I just enrolled." And he said, "But I'm intrigued. Why don't you before we talk about this any further, I'd love to hear you play." And so I said, "Okay." And Jerry was up at, Cambridge, Massachusetts. And so we booked a gig. We got a gig in Cambridge specifically to audition for Jerry. It's so funny.
Audition for him so that he could be swayed to drop out of the Ivy
Yeah.
Leagues.
Yeah. Usually it's the other way around. The guy auditions for the band. But in this case, the band was auditioning for the guy. And he had some misgivings, but overall, I think he liked us, where we were coming from. And we had dinner together the following night. And he said, "Look, I can't afford to just join a band right now unless there's a record deal. When you get a record deal, I'll join the band." And we said, "Well, hold on. First, we should do some gigs together to make sure that it works." And he said, "Okay." And so he would sit in with us from time to time. He came down to New York and played with us at CBGB's and at the Lower Manhattan Ocean Club. And we did some the Rat in Boston.
Mm-hmm.
And he joined us there, and I think we had a couple gigs at various universities in Massachusetts. And he would join us, Clark University over in Worcester. And we really liked Jerry. Was a fast learner, and he really knew how to fit in with. He really knew how to find his place amongst the four of us, and we could all tell, David, Tina, we could all tell that it was a good match.
quit seeing in the factory. She's making sure she is not dreaming. See the lights of the neighbor's house. Now she's starting to rise. Take a minute to concentrate, and she opens up her eyes. The world was moving, she was right there with it, and she was. The world was moving, she was floating above it, and she was.
Well, we were talking about music biographies earlier, and one of the books that I've read in the last couple of years and really enjoyed was Seymour Stein's autobiography. And so then after Jerry turned out to be a good fit, then you went back to Seymour and signed in 75, correct?
76.
Oh, 76. Yeah.
November 1st, 1976.
How would you describe your relationship with Seymour? I always find people that are good at spotting talent in others to be very interesting. And at the time, he had also signed the Ramones, but then later, helped kind of bring British new wave and British Britpop to America and British electronic music in the 80s.
Yeah.
And he signed Madonna.
He did sign Madonna. Yeah. Well, I always got along very well with Seymour, and he had a falling out with David for some reason, but Seymour was an old school record man. He was a person who really got into the music. It wasn't just business for him. It was as you pointed out, he could see a diamond in the rough, and he had Sire Records was located in New York City, just uptown from where we lived, and he said, I promise you, if you make a deal with me, you can come by Sire Records anytime, day or night, and we can talk if you have a problem or anything like that. And he had this townhouse on 74th Street. His office was up on the second floor, and we would do that.
Wasn't there a studio on the first floor?
In the basement.
Yeah.
There was a little studio. We never recorded anything except interviews in that studio, but it was like a demo studio, and it was. I can't wait till the biopic. It was a really good time.
Okay, so you were talking about how early on you were able to play a great live gig at a place like CBGB's, but when you tried to record, something was missing. When did you feel ready to make the first album?
Well, it was after we'd been playing with Jerry for a while, and Jerry wasn't playing every gig, but he was playing, any gigs that were near Boston. And we just felt like, okay, the time has come. We've got a lot of momentum now. We don't want to lose momentum. Let's make a record deal. Let's do it. And Seymour put us in touch. Either he had a deal with Tony Bon Jovi, or Tony Bon Jovi had a deal with him.
And for people that don't know, Tony Bon Jovi is a producer that had previously worked with people like Jimi Hendrix and Gloria Gaynor, and he's actually John Bon Jovi's cousin, I think.
I think he's his uncle.
Or his uncle. Okay.
Yeah, and he had, at the time that he was making our album, producing our album, Talking Heads 77, he had the number one hit in America, probably worldwide, with Disco Star Wars, which sold I don't know how many millions of copies around the world. So he was doing very well, but he wasn't such a good people person, how he became. He was also building with the money from Disco Star Wars. He was building the power station,
right?
famous recording studio. So he had a lot on his plate, and he was very distracted. And he was used to dealing with R&B people. He came up through Motown in his garage in New Jersey. He figured out how to emulate the Motown sound with local musicians, and you know he would create these Motown style songs and send them to Berry Gordy, who eventually hired him to work for Motown. But anyway, uh, he was used to dealing with really top notch R&B singers and studio session cats, and we in Talking Heads, we were not that.
Do you
But
remember it being hard work to lay down the drum tracks, or did it come relatively easily given your preparation?
he made us do multiple takes, and that's when I knew he would. And like even after say the third take, we felt was perfect. He had us do more and more and more, and that's when I knew he was listening for something other than what we were listening for.
Hmm.
Like,
Like maybe he
like
was listening for a level of precision that didn't lend itself as well to your music.
yes, he was listening for the slickness of "Never Can Say Goodbye." Fortunately, we had this great engineer, which Tony brought in to work on our project, Ed Stasium. Ed was the saving grace because Tony just didn't have the patience for us. But Ed just his attitude was kind of like, Tony, relax, leave this to me. And this is something new, you know. I don't mean to demean him in any way. I might sound a little unkind, but he was just not the right guy for us.
Were you happy with how it turned out just after you'd finished it? Were you proud of it?
Oh yeah, I thought it was amazing. I was so relieved that it sounded good.
How did the reaction to that record, both critically and popularity wise, comport with what your expectations were?
I never thought it was going to be like as big as the latest David Bowie album or anything like that. It was a struggle. We had to go to little radio stations all over the country, and we had to play little nightclubs and bars all around the country. We played abandoned supermarkets, pizza parlors. It was not glamorous, but to me it was wonderful. We drove ourselves in a station wagon. We could. One of my parents gave us this hand-me-down Ford Country Squire, and we could fit the band and all the equipment in this one station wagon. Can you imagine? And along with our manager Gary Kurfürst, we started a circuit. There was no circuit for bands like us. We were too small for the big promoters. We had to. A lot of times we had to promote the shows ourselves, or find a local college kid to do it, and that worked well. We created this new, like, sort of new wave circuit that then Blondie and Elvis Costello and later the B-52s, and they would end up playing the same places that we had played the month before. And so it was a very exciting time.
After the first album, you opted to work with a new collaborator on more songs, which was Brian Eno, and he produced a few records with you. How would you describe his production style at the time?
Well, he was completely different than Tony Bon Jovi, for example. He was more of an idea person. Like he called himself a non-musician, and
Were you all Roxy Music fans? Is that where the connection came from, or was it more to do with his work with Bowie?
It was Roxy Music and Brian's solo records, like Taking Tiger Mountain by Strategy and Here Come the Warm Jets, and also the work with Bowie. Although, yeah, all of that, we loved it all. And we met with him when we played in London, opening for the Ramones. We had one show of our own. The night before we played with the Ramones at the Roundhouse, we played this club called the Rock Garden, which was very small, but it was packed. We played there 2 nights, packed each night. And one night, John Cale and Brian Eno came, and we hung out. And we got invited to. Well, we went out to lunch with Brian the next day, and then we after the lunch we went to his apartment, and we hung out there on one of our days off. And he seemed like he would be good for us, and especially it seemed like he would be good for David. David was a person who needed encouragement and also someone who was willing to go there with him. Like we in the band were all willing to go there, like on a song like, say, Warning Sign or No Compassion or something like that. Brian seemed like a guy who could help us raise the bar, musically speaking. And so we went down to the Bahamas and we Brian had also done the first Devo record around that time at Connie Plank's studio in Germany. Connie Plank had worked with Kraftwerk and so on and so forth. We went down to Compass Point, which was a brand new studio. We were in the Bahamas. We were the first band to record there. And Chris Blackwell called he was friends with our manager, and he called him up and he said, what do you say, you bring the Talking Heads down to this new studio I have, and we'll give you a really good deal. So we got a really good deal, and Brian came down. Brian was very happy because all the gear was the same console, same tape machine, everything as the studio he was used to working in London, Islands Basing Street Studios. And they were designed by the same guy, a guy named Chow, a Chinese Jamaican. So anyway, Brian came down, we went down to the Bahamas, and we had the songs very well rehearsed. We had been playing a lot of them live on tour already. And all Brian really had to do on that first album with us was set up the mics. And he treated particularly the drums, but also other instruments, sometimes bass, sometimes a vocal, with this little briefcase-sized synthesizer that he had. It was very exciting for us. He also used delays on drums and rhythm guitars and things like that to make everything very rhythmically exciting.
When the band became more and more successful financially and popularity-wise, how did it affect the personal dynamic between the members? Well,
they always say that things get more difficult when money comes into the picture, and there were some ups and downs because of. I mean, mostly we got along fine, and mostly we enjoyed it. But I felt like the more success we had, the more unhappy David was, not just with the band, but with his entire situation, his entire life. It was like the opposite of most people. Most people, you have success, it makes you happy. But in his case, I think he was happier when we had no money. and no success.
Were you happier when you had money and success?
Well, yeah, I, 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 I was always happy, but it was very, comforting to know that I could put a little something in a savings account for later. You know.
What was the impetus to start Tom Tom Club? Just as the Talking Heads had released maybe your fourth album and were kind of reaching a peak of popularity.
Well, Tina and I never had any ambitions outside of Talking Heads. That was Talking Heads to us was the mothership. But David decided he was going to make a solo album. He didn't know how long it was going to take. That album ended up being called The Catherine Wheel. And when David said it was a collaboration with the choreographer Twyla Tharp. And Jerry got wind of David making a solo album. And he said, well, if David's going to make a solo album, I'm going to make a solo album. So he was off making a solo album. And Tina and I thought, well, what are we going to do? And our accountant said, you better do something, because that last Remain in Light tour, didn't make any money for you guys. It was a very successful tour, but because we had 9 people on stage and we had, a very full road crew for the first time, and, flights and hotel rooms and everything, by the end of the tour, there was very little left for Chris and Tina. So our accountant said, you better do something. Seymour said, oh, I can't do 3 Talking Heads solo albums. No way. So Gary, in a very smart way, went to Chris Blackwell of Island Records, and he said, Chris and Tina are interested in doing a record. What do you think? And he said, well, I appreciate the value of a good rhythm section. Have them come down to Compass Point and record a single. And if I like the single, then they can do a whole album. So we went down to Compass Point and we recorded a song called Wordy Rapping Hood. We called him into the studio. He said, I love it. And I'm going to release it as a single in Europe and Latin America. Meanwhile, you guys get busy doing the rest of the album. We just stayed down in the Bahamas and kept working on this record. And we brought Adrian Belew down.
How did you meet Adrian?
Well, Adrian had been on the Remain in Light tour. Eno had called him in to play a couple. When he came through town with David Bowie, Adrian was playing with David Bowie. And when he came through town with David Bowie, Eno snagged him for a day, and he came and he played on a couple of the songs on Remain in Light. He did solos, and they were extraordinary. Then we met. He wasn't working with David Bowie anymore, so we managed to get him on the Remain in Light tour, and that was really great too. And we were very, very friendly with Adrian, so we invited him. He had already played on David's record and Jerry's record. Now we invited him down to the Bahamas, along with his wife and kids, by the way, to play on our Tom Tom Club record, which we had already recorded the basic tracks for. And he did some real cool stuff.
Genius of Love is one of the most sampled songs of all time. Can you remember when you first started hearing it as a sample?
I heard it performed by other people before sampling even. The first one was a group called Jekyll and Hyde on Profile Records, and they did a thing called Genius Rap. And that was, I don't know if he was Jekyll or Hyde, but one of them was Andre Harrell.
Right.
Famous R&B impresario. And then the second time
I think
I heard...
just passed away like last month. Yes,
you're correct. You're right. The next time I heard it, it was a Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five did a song called "It's Nasty, Genius of Love," but these were actually played by people. They weren't samples. And anyway, it went on and on and on. It was like the R&B world and the hip hop world just couldn't get enough of that Genius of Love beat.
I think Mariah Carey had a hit with it in the 90s.
Yes, now that was true sampling, but yeah, she had It's called Fantasy.
So were you guys able to buy a plane with that song?
We didn't buy a plane. We bought a boat. We bought a boat, and it was a beautiful boat. We don't have her anymore, but we sailed all through the Bahamas and up and down the east coast of America, from the Bahamas to Maine. I think I did that trip 9 times. It was wonderful. It was like a whole new thing for me because Talking Heads wasn't really touring very much after Stop Making Sense. Actually, not at all. David put the kibosh on touring, and he said, "Oh, the movie's going to tour for us instead." And so we had a lot of time on our hands, and sailing was the perfect antidote to the pressures we were under at the time.
You mentioned earlier that when you set out to write the book, you did not want to come off as an embittered whiner. What is your fondest memory of playing in the Talking Heads, or playing in Talking Heads, that perhaps you outlined in the book?
My fondest memory? Well, I have so many. I would say the early days at CBGB's, I have very fond memories of that. As a 3-piece, and later as a 4-piece. And I have the first tour we did of Europe with the Ramones, supporting the Ramones in the spring of '77. We didn't even have our album out. We had a single, "Love Goes to a Building on Fire." On the strength of that single and also our reputation, we got to be the support band for the Ramones, and that was just amazing because it was the heyday. The Sex Pistols had just released their first album. The Clash had just released their first album. The Jam, the Slits. It was totally exciting, and then I would say touring America was. There were a lot of places in America that I had never been to. Texas, for example. One of my fondest memories is pulling up to this place in Austin, Texas, called the Armadillo World Headquarters, which was a giant Quonset hut, and it had the longest bar in the entire state of Texas. The bar was like, I don't know how many yards long, maybe 50 yards long. and we pulled up to this giant Quonset hut, and there was like 25 or 30 Harley Davidsons parked outside, and we thought, oh no, they're not going to like us here. This is not going to be pretty.
But of course, Jerry's from the birthplace of Harley Davidson, so that gives him a pass.
That's true. But they did love us. They absolutely loved us down there. I have very fond memories of that, and also playing. Not so much the Whiskey. I didn't love that gig in LA, but we did love the Roxy, which we played, I think, in 1978, and lots of New Orleans. The first time going to New Orleans, oh my God, it was like some form of rock and roll heaven down there.
Music heaven.
Music heaven, yes.
Was there ever a time when it stopped being fun?
Every once in a while, you get up on the wrong side of the bed and you're not having a great day. But a lot of times, by the end of the night, after the performance, you see, Talking Heads really never failed to get a big round of applause at the end of the night, and we never failed to connect with the audience. And so even if I was having a lousy day to begin with, after we did the show, I was basking in the afterglow, you know?
So no matter what was going on, you always were able to find the joy during the actual performance.
Yeah. I just felt lucky to be doing that and to be there. And it was so great to, at the end of the night, share a hotel room with Tina.
Yeah, I have to say it's quite an accomplishment that you've been together for so long. So many people, especially in the music business, have difficulties maintaining such long-term relationships.
Our case is rare. I mean, we just celebrated our 43rd anniversary, wedding anniversary. But I think we've really been together for almost 50 years.
How would you describe your relationship with David these days?
Well, I don't have a wonderful relationship with David. I wish it were better. I mean, I haven't even seen him in person since 2003. We whatever communications we have are by email, and we still have business together, with licensed songs to movies and whatever the latest Netflix show is, stuff like that.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for being on the show, and I will look forward to reading your travel book, the first volume of many, I'm sure.
Yes, it's going to be a good one.
The Trap Set is produced by me, Joe Wong, along with Chris Karwowski, who also edits the program. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at The Trap Set, and visit our website, thetrapset.net, to subscribe to our show for free. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please donate to our show. If you can't afford to donate, please tell a friend and give us a good rating on iTunes. Send your feedback and guest requests to thetrapset@gmail.com.